Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this GAA meeting, which has typically two purposes. One is, if quorum is achieved, to transact business, and the business that we would have transacted had quorum been achieved had to do with Kerr and King and a motion that I think has been on the table, as it were, of this committee for the last several years. Thank you, Jay, and whoever else was here. Stephen? No, okay. So no thanks to you, but thanks, Jay. I know somebody else was involved in the motion. Anyway, in case the motion was going to be able to be carried out, but it's not. And so you're all reduced to the only other reason for the GAA meeting, which is to listen to me give a State of the University address. So I really want to thank you all for being here. If we somehow or other achieve quorum while I'm speaking, then we can move to that business that I mentioned before. The GAA is an annual meeting mandated by the University of Saskatchewan Act, and it is also mandated that the President of the University of Saskatchewan give a sort of State of the University address. I think that's the language actually in the Act. And I really appreciate doing this. This is the fourth now that I've given. I can't quite believe that, but it is. And you can tell me if I'm right or wrong about the success of this, but I do try to put a lot of thought into what would be the most useful kind of thing to say to an audience like this on an annual basis about where the university is. And so I try to place the university within a larger regional and national and at times global context. I intend it to be inspiring. In other words, I do go over some of the achievements of the past year or so, but I also intend it to be challenging. And I begin by acknowledging that we are on Treaty 6 territory in the traditional homeland of the Métis. We pay our respects to our First Nations and Métis ancestors of this place and reaffirm our relationships with one another. In previous GAA remarks, I've spoken about the need for universities like ours to pursue a change agenda. Our new university plan now communicates that position, and I thank all of you for contributing to making it unique, creative, future-oriented, and outward-looking. I am in the process of visiting every college and school faculty council on campus to deliver that message in greater detail. But I feel that the university and I owe everybody here and everybody across the campus a huge vote of thanks for what you have been able to do and the challenges that you have faced over the last 3 years because of some of the funding issues that we have been faced with. I thank all the colleges and schools and units for their plans as well. So we didn't just come up with a university level plan. That wasn't really the point of this. The point was to devise something at a university level that could initiate aligned responses from colleges and schools. And I thank all of them for their plans, which align so creatively with the universities. They're bold, they're visionary, and all of this befits the ambitions of this great university. In the process of creating these plans, we have focused our energies and resources, and implicitly we have rejected being everything to everyone. We've identified our strengths and our commitments for the next 6 years so that we can move the needle and have the greatest impact beyond ourselves, and that's part of the theme of this talk, that we can have. A sort of University of Saskatchewan version of tidying up with Marie Kondo, and as with her life-changing magic, so too with ours, we need to embrace and pursue change. So what kind of change are we talking about at this university and in the university sector in this country and beyond? Universities have existed for almost 1,000 years. In some basic ways, they haven't changed much over that time. Today's convocation ceremonies with their academic gowns and pomp mimic the ecclesiastical and judicial spirit of the medieval university of many centuries ago. Today's lecture halls with one sage on the stage, do the same. Of all the institutions we have in the Western world and have had for centuries, clergy, nobility, commoners, those were the original three estates. The press, that's the fourth estate. Medicine, the judiciary, business and education, universities have remained relatively unchanged by the disruptions that have swept through the others. Journalism, for instance, is the example that I often use, you'd have many others, has been transformed by social media, by technological advances in transmitting information, and by skepticism of journalistic authority. Closures of newspapers have been rampant and will continue. Many media outlets are shadows of their former selves. Facebook is the world's largest media empire, yet it creates none of its own content. Universities, however, have been relatively, I emphasize relatively, but still relatively immune to all of this. The great challenge for all of us, and I say this to myself every day that I come into work in one form or another, faculty, staff, student leaders, administrators, all of the colleagues in administration with whom I work so closely and are here today, the great challenge for all of us is to prepare the university for greater and more encompassing change over a shorter period of time than it has ever experienced, and to lead that change in this post-truth era. We all have a role in turning the university to be outward-looking, in identifying and solving the world's big challenges, whether they be local or global, and in governing ourselves not only on the basis of what we want to be, but what the world needs us to be. That is why our plan is titled The University the World Needs, and Naganitan Manachihitoonaan, Leading with Respect, the Cree name that it was gifted. What the University the World needs from us, the title of this address, is a new understanding of the university's value proposition. It cannot just be made on our terms alone, maybe my most important point. It cannot be made just on our terms alone, nor can it be made in economic terms alone. It needs to be made on intellectual, scientific, and cultural terms with the understanding that higher education is a public good, not simply a set of private benefits for those who happen to participate in it. Our value is that we contribute to what is needed for the public good, not what is needed just by us. Whether or not the University of Saskatchewan meets this challenge will affect the quality of our programming, our levels of public support, our student enrollments, our relevance to Indigenous communities, our funding, both private and public, our research productivity, the level of innovation in Canada, which I'll get to in a minute, and ultimately, in a post-truth world, our contribution to the moral fabric of the country and the globe. There's no doubt universities already serve important purposes in Canada. At first glance, it might seem that because they do, not that much change is needed. And this is the kind of thing that actually I hear a lot, not at this university, but as I participate in post-secondary dialogue. There are, for instance, 1.7 million students at Canada's 96 universities. 1.6 million new jobs were created over the last decade or so, filled by university graduates. That's 3 times those filled by graduates of all other types of post-secondary education combined. Canadian universities were a $35 billion enterprise in direct expenditures. Of this total, the members of the U15, like us of course, have the bulk of that impact because of the research that we do. Typically at least twice the economic impact of non-U15 universities. The research conducted in many parts of this university this past year contributes to this, and I want to give just a few examples. This past year's examples include the fact we've opened a one-of-a-kind-in-the-world livestock and forage center of excellence, a research facility focused on improving the environmental sustainability, efficiency, and profitability of beef production in Saskatchewan and beyond. It harnesses the expertise and interdisciplinary connections of partners and key stakeholders in industry and research. Our Sylvia Fedoruk Canadian Centre for Nuclear Innovation received federal funding to renovate the innovation wing of our cyclotron, to conduct leading-edge imaging research that will improve detection of cancers and other diseases, work that our health sciences researchers are actively engaged in. Our Vito Intervac received major federal funding to begin manufacturing vaccines that they have developed. We've built the Collaborative Sciences Research Building with a $30 million federal strategic innovation grant. It will bring together researchers from many disciplines to help solve complex challenges. We were successful last year in the federal government's Canada 150 Research Chair Program, one of fewer than 24 universities out of Canada's 96 to be successful, designed to attract research talent from outside Canada and to take advantage of Canada's attractiveness for scholars in the midst of geopolitical realities like Brexit and US politics. Dr. Jay Famiglietti left the NASA Jet Propulsion Labs to come to our Global Institute for Water Security as our Canada 150 Research Chair. This past year, 4 of our faculty were inducted into the Royal Society and 1 into the College of New Scholars, the highest number in 1 year we've ever seen. We received the 4 Vanier Scholars last year at the graduate level, 3 of them Indigenous, again, the highest number we've ever seen. Dr. Carrie Barassa and the CIHR Indigenous Peoples Health Institute relocated here from Ontario. The previous year, Dr. Alexandra King joined us from British Columbia as the Cameco Chair in Indigenous Health after a search lasting well over a decade. 11 of the 12 recent Saskatchewan Health Research Fund Major Achievement Awards went to University of Saskatchewan researchers. It is not surprising that our Tri-Council success rates are up, that our national CIHR success rates and submission numbers were at historic highs, and that Research InfoSource, which ranks Canada's top 50 research universities, raised us from 13th out of 50 last year to 11th this year. One of our faculty members, Dr. Reagan Mandrick in Arts and Sciences Computer Science Department, received NSERC's prestigious Stacey Memorial Fellowship, one of only 6 faculty in all of Canada to do so, which celebrates the achievements of young scientists. And stay tuned for more announcements regarding this kind of success here shortly. With all this research and applied science activity, we attract thousands of visiting researchers, students, postdocs, and faculty from around the world to work and study here. So many, in fact, that we needed to build a hotel to ensure they could find accommodation, so we did, and we opened that last year. In these respects and more, we are already fulfilling our university plan commitment to unleash discovery and confront humanity's greatest challenges and opportunities. In addition to this, 96% of our graduates get jobs upon graduation, thereby contributing to the economy. And when you consider that our enrollment numbers, flatlining a few years ago, have now increased between 1% and 3% annually in recent years, that contribution will become ever more significant. I often take advantage of the opportunity to say that if we were sitting at a university in a situation like this in many other parts of Canada, we would not be able to say that about enrollment numbers. This year, our student numbers are up by as much as 3%. We're at approximately 25,000 students this year, and well on our way to the goal of 28,000 by 2025. In fact, as I also say, our challenge is to ask ourselves, how big do we actually want to get, and to stay true to the mission and vision and values of this great university. Indigenous student graduation numbers and enrollments are higher than ever before, not just enrollments, but graduation numbers. I'll speak more about that later. Our new Prince Albert campus, to be opened in 2020, will support that city and the region in many ways. It's an example of us continuing to think big in the face of economic challenges the past 3 years, and I thank all of you for doing that. The Prince Albert campus will attract many students from the area and north who might otherwise not have access to our Saskatoon campus, and likely the majority of those students will be Indigenous. So, given all of that, and that's just a short list of the things I could say if I were merely covering the successes and achievements of this institution over the last year, so what's to change? There is a constant need for even more of our graduates in this province, something that we are telling government continually. 44% of Saskatchewan jobs require a university degree, and only 24% are occupied by someone holding one. Think about that. I'll come back to that statistic later, but think about that. This means we must understand and respond better than we currently do to the province's employment needs. This is a challenge for all universities in Canada, not just for the University of Saskatchewan in this province. Although universities do not exist primarily to satisfy the specific requirements of the labor market, and I want to emphasize that, the public good is served by low unemployment and by employees trained for what's needed. So universities must understand that occupations, professions, and career patterns are changing at a rate we've never seen before. Merely keeping pace instead of falling behind means change for us. Leading in this regard means substantially altering our modes of and attitudes toward external engagement. A recent RBC report titled Humans Wanted, this was a very influential report for me and for many people in the post-secondary education sector. I encourage you, as I have encouraged the university community many times, to take a look at it. It's easily available online. That report says that over a quarter of Canadian jobs will be heavily disrupted by automation in the next decade. You can find different figures by different bodies that have studied this phenomenon, but they all add up to somewhere near the same thing. And the Canada's university system, and I quote here, is inadequately designed to help Canadian youth navigate this new skills economy. Careers that we used to think of as lasting a lifetime now tend to last only half a decade, requiring people in them to upskill or train for new careers that they never anticipated. Trucking won't last as a job opportunity due to automation. That's where a university like ours has even greater importance than before. The country is not training for predictable employment needs anymore, such an important point. It's training for employment that will require at least 35 skills per job, transferable and flexible skills that only a university can deliver. An assessment of 20,000 skills across 300 occupations and just under 2.5 million expected job openings in this country alone shows the need for communication skills, collaboration and connectivity with mentors, complex problem solving and critical thinking, the 4 C's. Digital fluency will be essential to all new jobs. Students are the ones who have identified these, as have employers. On the flip side, many new jobs are being created by the advanced technologies that are causing that to happen. And those advanced technologies are products of university research and university training. New jobs are opening up that 5 to 10 years ago no one would have predicted would even exist. And this means that people already in careers will need to change what they do and what they know. Here, too, universities like ours can help by building a culture of lifelong learning, upskilling, and skills fitness. Change involves being responsive to employment needs, to disruptive technologies and their effects on the workforce, and to upskilling the continual supply of people whose automated jobs will have made them redundant. Universities in Canada must respond by becoming more permeable, accessible by employers who can help identify the future of job creation so that universities can better align programming to new employment needs. 65% of students at Canadian universities are involved in work-integrated learning programs. 65%, closer to 50%, just under 50% of our students are. The federal government believes we should be striving for 100%. Business agrees, students agree. Here as well, our university plan positions us for change. One of our guideposts in this regard is to ensure new and enhanced applied learning experiences for students. That won't be easy. Last month's federal budget, making it a little easier, responded to this by creating 84,000 new student work placements by 2023 through an almost $800 million investment. We must take advantage of this. We should also be striving to increase the number of our students who study abroad. Students want to study internationally, to become globally engaged citizens fluent with other cultures and ways of being, yet only 3% of Canadian universities in any given year travel abroad to further their studies, and University of Saskatchewan students are right on that national average, 3%. By comparison, most countries as privileged as ours see many more of their university students take advantage of study abroad opportunities. Federal Budget 2019, I just wanted to mention this as well, pledges $148 million over 5 years toward a new international education strategy, which includes an outward-bound student mobility pilot program providing international work and study opportunities. This is something that Universities Canada and the U15 strongly lobbied for and I like to think influenced. The funds would also go toward promoting the merits of Canada as a destination of choice for international students, so it works both ways. Our international blueprint has the goal of increasing outbound student mobility to closer to 5% from that 3%, a realistic and important aspiration that we need to make good on. Being more permeable also means connecting organizations and companies with our research capacities. Our university plan asks us to pursue growth in commercial outcomes. Currently, universities are complex beasts to most outside of them. If a company has a research need, it is not easy for it to know how to find what it needs at a university, not just ours, all universities in Canada. The universities and business sectors in many countries do this far better than Canada does. Israel is one example of that. There are many more, but let me just stress this one. Israel is an example of one whose university and business sectors are well connected, and Canada has a lot to learn from it and from others about how to increase research productivity and innovation. The opportunities for this do exist in our own backyard. Our strategic research plan, titled Discovery the World Needs, seeks increased engagement with startups and businesses in the adjacent Innovation Place Research Park by faculty, research fellows, and by students. The potential of such an innovation corridor here is tremendous, and I say this partly because last year our Innovation Enterprise Unit worked with more ideas, people, and market research projects than ever before, partly through its possible academia, industry, meeting days, or AIM days initiative. I often think about this, to put all of that in context. Canada is in the bottom third of the 36 OECD countries for R&D spending as a percentage of GDP. In 2004, it was about 2%. It has gone steadily down since then to about 1.7%. The bottom third. We're behind, no disrespect, countries such as Slovenia and the Czech Republic. We are only slightly ahead of Estonia, Italy, and Portugal. Our innovation ranking is about the same and has been dropping. Israel, back to Israel, far ahead of us is at the top, and about 30 Israels would fit into this province alone. Forget about Canada, would fit into this province alone. It has no natural resources, situated mostly on a desert with a limited supply of fresh water, and instead, as the father of startups in Israel mentioned to me about a year and a half ago when I visited Israel, their natural resources are between their ears. Nevertheless, it leads the world in innovation, startups, and R&D investment. It has the highest number of startups per capita of any country in the world, earning it the title of Startup Nation. It's not risk adverse. It educates its university students to learn from failures, and it connects university research with the country's many needs and challenges. Canada, rich in natural resources, relatively secure militarily, risk adverse and conservative by nature, does not experience the imperative of innovation, and if you at least look at those OECD statistics, it shows. Universities such as ours have a major role to play in turning this around. Canada does not have an ecosystem of industry labs the way the US does. Research universities supply this strength in Canada. If we are going to be disruptive in research breakthroughs, here they're going to be driven by universities like ours. It's going to happen at universities like this one if it's going to happen in Canada. The challenge is to connect up universities and industry, business, not-for-profits, communities, and all other sectors whose futures depend on the knowledge economy. Here, too, our university plan is predictive. It commits us to be viewed as an accessible go-to resource by partners and stakeholders in Saskatchewan and beyond. A few examples of how we are doing this involve our Global Water Futures Research Program funded by the federal Canada First Research Excellence Fund. It involves us with 335 partners, including 15 other universities and $292 million in funding and in-kind support, 162 faculty investigators, almost 500 researchers, and many students have been hired as a result. The program has generated 6 new Indigenous community water projects, each co-led by an Indigenous community. Other examples from this past year of disruptive research serving community needs include a new flagship SSHRC program to reimagine energy security involving an international and multi-sectoral partnership with Northern and Indigenous communities. We have, many of you would know this, a new flagship program in the Cannabis Research Initiatives of Saskatchewan, or CRIS, a unique interdisciplinary exploration of potential new strains of cannabis for medical use. And we are investigating in emerging areas such as revitalizing agriculture on Indigenous lands and ensuring safe water supplies and sustainable communities. Researchers in our Global Institute for Food Security and the College of Agriculture and Bioresources were key members of an international consortium that successfully mapped the bread wheat genome this past year. This was an enormous global breakthrough. And just this morning, it was announced that they played a key role in mapping the durum wheat genome. Just this morning, that was announced. Examples of disruptive research with untold public benefit that only great universities can provide. And the connectivity that I'm speaking about isn't just with those sectors. We need to respond also at the faculty level to the current significant issues of the day. Our university plan directs us to do this by acquiring heightened public and private sector recognition of the impact of our work in the region, the province, the nation, and the world. We're now often seen to be engaging with current issues that universities can play a role in helping understand. I'm thinking here of something like Conversation Canada. If you don't know about it, many of you in this room I know do. If you don't, take a look at it. Conversation Canada, an international online academic newswire with a huge audience worldwide, has had participation by faculty here. Recent contributions by them include pieces on Canada's shameful history of sterilizing Indigenous women, on federal back-to-work legislation, on Trump and populism, on U of S-led solutions to Canada's water issues, last week on the carbon tax. As an institution of contributing authors, we have well surpassed the 1 million readership mark. But we can do more in this regard, and I urge all of us to weigh in publicly on the issues that matter and for which we have unique expertise and perspectives. You might be thinking, and I found myself thinking this as well, that with all I've said to this point, the humanities, the social sciences, and the fine arts are being devalued, overlooked, and marginalized. Many employers, however, regard them as more important now than ever before. Another finding of that RBC Humans Wanted report. Small example, the majority of successful Silicon Valley high-tech startups by Canadians are led by people with humanities degrees in that so-called C100 group. The innovation curve is raising deep ethical issues in IT, in medicine, in business. It will require legal expertise. It will need people trained in philosophy to understand the ethics of a digitized economy. And by the way, I don't mean that the programming should change. I just mean that after graduation, people with these kinds of degrees are highly needed and employable. It will require public policy influencers to understand how to respond to it, communicators and political scientists to help other countries learn from advances in crop techniques. In an increasingly globalized economy, faculty with languages, with languages is of paramount importance and widely coveted. It will be important to engage with the ethical issues around vaccines, the communications challenges that contribute to global food and water insecurity, the design thinking that will strengthen urban planning for future generations. Understanding Islamic culture, belief in history, and the political and spiritual complexities attendant on them will make a greater difference to the globe's well-being and to the goal of eradicating Islamophobia than many of the traditional scientific disciplines will. These aren't vague predictions of the future value of the humanities, social sciences, and fine arts. Canada will not improve without people trained in them. And the same can be said more locally. The MOU we signed last year with the city of Saskatoon, all great cities need great universities. Try to think of a great city that does not have one. That MOU identifies many challenges Saskatoon faces that can be helped by University of Saskatchewan researchers and students in public policy, urban planning, the social determinants of health, Indigenous studies, political studies, community health and epidemiology, economics, history, and so on. In short, the broad range of social sciences and humanities. On the artistic side, our agreements with the Saskatoon Symphony Orchestra and the Reme Modern are operational, each a first of its kind in this country as well. And faculty working together across diverse parts of the university have received almost $500,000 in funding from the Digital Strategy Fund of the Canada Council for the Arts to improve the digital capacity of the provincial arts community and the not-for-profit sector in general. Perhaps the largest grant from that fund in this country, and likely the largest grant ever received by the fine arts on this campus. As our university plan states, we will foster, expand, and diversify local, national, and global partnerships with governments, businesses, and civil society in rural, northern, and urban communities, rooted in reciprocal learning and the co-creation of knowledge. In this country, coming as no surprise to you at this university, but it's important to remind ourselves of it, one of the greatest challenges and the greatest of opportunities is reconciliation. Universities have an enormous role to play in achieving this goal. I don't usually refer to numbers in this respect, but I will this time just because they tell part of the story. 23% of non-Indigenous Canadians hold a university degree. 11% of Indigenous Canadians hold a university degree. The cost of that education gap in this province alone has been pegged at $1.1 billion annually in a study commissioned and written by one of our faculty members, by the way. That other gap I mentioned earlier, the 44%, 24% number of jobs that require a university education in this province and the number of jobs that are filled by people who have a university education, that other gap that I mentioned earlier can be solved simply, just think about it this way, by raising the university degree attainment level of Indigenous people in Saskatchewan to that of non-Indigenous people. It's a simple equation. It's helpful to think of it that way. We continue to do our part by enrolling higher numbers of Indigenous students each year and supporting them for success at graduation and after graduation. But we know we need to make fundamental changes to what the university is doing, and our vision commits us all to that. I'm talking here about the document that we devised as a community a couple of years ago that states we will be an outstanding institution of research, learning, knowledge-keeping, reconciliation, and inclusion with and by Indigenous peoples and communities. So does our more recent university plan. Indigenization runs through all of it. I keep on talking about this publicly because it's so important. It's not just one commitment among several, it's foundational to the whole document. It touches on virtually every aspect of what we do at this university. It is that way because elders, knowledge keepers, and Indigenous community leaders supported and informed its design, and in the fall gifted it that Indigenous title, Naganitan Manachihitoonaan, to lead with respect. We must make good on that as well, and we are. A few examples of that. I hesitate to give these because I end up leaving colleges and wonderful initiatives out in a list that can't go on long enough. But permit me to offer a few. The College of Law will review and develop policies and practices that are respectful of the diversity of Indigenous groups and that honor elders and traditional knowledge keepers. The college now requires students to take a first-year course in Indigenous relations and history. Its program in Nunavut is in its second successful year. The College of Pharmacy and Nutrition has enhanced teaching and learning practices through the development of Indigenous curricular competencies within their learning community and is establishing a transfer credit MOU with the Saskatchewan Indian Institute of Technologies and with FNUC. The College of Agriculture and Bioresources is establishing an elder in residence program. Dentistry, I predicted this in this speech last year and it's come to fruition, is establishing a network of 7 special care clinics serving high-need communities throughout Saskatchewan. This is transformative work. Engineering, to continue with the list, is building respectful relationships with Indigenous communities, advancing unique opportunities for sustainable infrastructure in rural, remote, and Indigenous communities, and starting a first-year access program to encourage Indigenous student participation and enrollment. I was speaking about that program on CTV last week or so. Arts and Science will transform its existing faculty complement with a total of 30 new hires of Indigenous scholars over the next 10 years. It announced this over a year ago, putting its faculty complement on par with the overall Indigenous population in the province. It is implementing an Indigenous learning requirement for all its students for 2020. The Western College of Veterinary Medicine is increasing Indigenous graduate student funding and is growing its engagement and community outreach. The Vice-Provost Indigenous Engagement, Jackie Ottman, leads a committee on anti-racist, anti-oppression education and research, and on land and place-based education and research. We have MOUs with the FSIN, the STC, and with Canadian Roots Exchange. I'm signing an MOU in Prince Albert with the Grand Council later this month. They serve a purpose. They are commitments. We co-hosted the FSIN Post-Secondary Forum in the fall. I spoke at the FSIN Assembly in February in Yorkton, as our MOU with that organization commits the president here to doing. The first time a University of Saskatchewan president has spoken at that event. 3 of the 11 members of our Board of Governors are Indigenous. Our Indigenous faculty and staff numbers continue to increase. But you all know, I just wanted to acknowledge it formally in this speech, we have more work to do with Indigenous communities, and we are committed to doing it. Changes such as these must continue. So in summing up, these are the great challenges facing Canadian universities: to become more responsive to the greatest issues of today, to train students for the workforce of tomorrow, to drive innovation and to further reconciliation. Whether or not we meet these challenges will affect the quality of our programming, our levels of public support, our student enrollments, our relevance to Indigenous people, our research productivity, our funding, both private and public, the level of innovation in Canada, and ultimately in a post-truth world, the moral fabric of the country and the globe. If we could control all of the external forces that I've mentioned here, change would not be an imperative, but we cannot. And therefore change is. It's no longer a question of if we change, but what we change. No longer why we should change, but how we should change. All of this is why our university governs itself, not only on the basis of what we want to be, but what the world needs us to be. Our university plan is outward focused for the reasons that I've stated here. It is a bold and ambitious plan, different from those of other universities in its emphasis on connecting with the needs of a city, a province, and a country that have much to provide the world. Our role as a major research university gifted with a unique scientific infrastructure and talent, exemplary professional colleges and programs, and a wealth of arts programs and talent is central to the success of Canada's innovation agenda and to building a strong and globally influential future. If we agree to embrace change and participate in innovation, and commit to governing ourselves accordingly, we have all the features necessary. We have it all. We've got everything we need. We have all the features necessary to contribute with confidence to a better and more sustainable world. Well, thank you very much for listening to all that.